So again, my name is Amanda Pommichter. I am the Agency Records Officer with the National Institutes of Health. And so I'm going to be talking today about navigating M-19-21, the real-life strategies for your records management program. So just to tell you a little bit about the National Institutes of Health, we are comprised of 27 institutes and centers. We have almost 40,000 staff members, and this includes employees, contractors, volunteers, student interns, and fellows. So we're one of the largest operating divisions within the Department of Health and Human Services. Our mission is to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce illness, so I'm very proud to support this mission. And so I wanted to go ahead and talk about the strategies and perspectives that we're trying to implement at the National Institutes of Health in order to meet the M-19-21 requirements. So hopefully some of what I share today will be useful to you and your agency going forward. So let's begin. All right, so the first strategy I want to talk about is embracing M-19-21 as an opportunity to build a lasting information management program. So I think that this is a journey that we've been on, and it really started back in 2011 with the Presidential Memorandum on Managing Government Records. And there's one passage in particular that I want to take us back to. And so I'll go ahead and read that. But when records are well managed, agencies can use them to assess the impact of programs to reduce redundant efforts, to save money, and to share knowledge within and across their organizations. In these ways, proper records management is the backbone of open government, and open government is necessary for any functioning democracy. So I think what we have been attempting to do on this, this journey is very important. So I think it's worth mentioning where we began. So following this presidential memorandum, we were met with all of the requirements of M-1218. And I remember thinking at the time, and this was shared amongst agency records officers, is that this was an unfunded mandate. We didn't have the resources at that time. We didn't have management support. So we were really struggling and didn't know how we were going to meet those deadlines. But the good news is that most of us were able to meet those deadlines. And I think it's important to remember where we have been and those successes that we've had. And so looking back at the records management self-assessments, most federal agencies were reporting that they did meet those requirements. So that's great news. So just remember our past successes and that M-19-21 is an opportunity to build on those previous successes. And that we can do this. So again, just look at this as an opportunity. Know that you can do this. And I think that will help us moving forward as we talk about and embrace these challenges. So next, I want to talk about transitioning from paper records and those processes to electronic workflows and electronic records management. So it's going to be really important for us to go ahead and transfer our paper records, both permanent and temporary, over to the federal records centers. I know that they're temporarily closed right now, but continue to encourage your staff, once they're back in the office, to go ahead and start transferring those records over as soon as possible. So that's one part of our strategy. The other part of it is to go ahead and look at those processes that result in the creation of paper records and start thinking, is there an opportunity to implement a digital workflow? Is this something that we can digitize? Do these records need to be created in a paper format, or can we go ahead and manage them electronically? And this is a great time to start thinking about those requirements because we're a couple years out from our deadline of December 31st, 2022. So one of the tools that I have used at NIH is to request the holdings report, the O1 holdings report from my account representative at the National Archives. And that report includes all of the details for those records that NIH holds at the Federal Records Center. And from that report, I've been able to determine which offices are creating the most amount of paper. And that's important because I can use that information to initiate a discussion with those offices. I can let them know you're creating a lot of paper and we have this M-19-21 requirement, and it's time for you to transition from paper record keeping to electronic record keeping. So using that report, I was able to really get a hold of that data that I needed to start those discussions. So that's a resource that should be available to most federal agencies. And so I would recommend taking a look at it. We've also been able to use that information to align schedules with lines of business. And so for instance, at NIH, I've been able to determine that acquisitions, for instance, the records that are created in in support of those functions. A lot of them are being created in paper format. So I can go to leadership and we can start talking about solutions. So just to promote the use of the holdings report and addressing those issues, I think is a good solution that we've been able to use, and hopefully you can leverage as well. So I also want to talk about focusing on training staff with the knowledge, skills, and abilities to manage electronic records. So going forward, we will be transitioning from managing paper records to managing electronic records. And while I think it's unrealistic to say we're never going to touch paper again, the bulk of our skills are going to have to be geared towards managing electronic records. So there's a couple of tools that are out there in order to get the training and education that you need in order to meet those requirements going forward. So the first one is I definitely want to promote NAR's online training. I think that's a great source of tools that address records management, record keeping, that you or your staff can start using now. The other source is I would like to point you to information management associations. They have workshops and conferences and other tools available online, such as white papers, that are a great resource to learning more about electronic records and what is required to actually manage these going forward. So some of the associations that I'm aware of would be AIM, ARMA, and SAA, the Society of American Archivists. So I would encourage you or your staff to go out and check out these resources and start promoting them within your organizations now. The other thing is I do want to mention that there are colleges and universities with online programs, maybe even in-person programs, that do relate to and speak to some of the issues that we deal with as information management professionals. So one that I am closely familiar with is the University of Maryland's iSchool has a postmaster's certificate program in the curation and management of digital assets. So that is just one resource. There's many out there. So look at schools that offer library and information science or iSchool related programs, and they may have some courses that could also help you or your staff. So this is a great time to start advocating for the training and the education that you'll need in order to carry out those responsibilities going forward. All right. All right, so another strategy I want to talk about, actually I think I might have skipped ahead, is developing change management and communications plans to reach target audiences. And so there are some agencies out there that may be very fortunate and have change management and communication specialists that they can consult with and reach out to get a strategy in place for M-19-21. However, if you are not fortunate, I'd encourage you to start thinking like a change management specialist or a communications specialist. So some of the strategies that I would like to promote is to come up with a communications plan. Determine who are those target audiences that you need to reach. And then what message do you need to sell them? So if I were to just go through M-19-21 with them and go over all the details and the nuance, and I would just be overwhelming my target audiences. So you really want to focus the message to what's important to them. And also always keep in mind, what kind of behavior are you attempting to change, or do you want to see done differently? And again, that's going to inform your message. It's also going to inform what kind of guidance material you need to prepare, what kind of training you need to offer. So again, think like a change management specialist, think like a communication specialist, develop your plans, target leadership that you need on your side, and then enact these plans and be realistic about your deadlines. We know that we have a couple years, but don't start this in 2022 and think that you're going to get the results that you want. Develop your plan in order to meet that deadline and be realistic about that critical path going forward. Who do you need to train on metadata and formats, and who do you need to train up to make sure that they're transferring their paper records to NARA before that deadline? So again, target your audience and focus your message, and that's one of the strategies that we're implementing. Next up, I want to talk about updating your policies, ensuring that all your schedules are media neutral. So the concept here is that make sure your house is in order before you go out to others in your agency and tell them what to do. So at NIH, we've been updating all of our policies to make sure that they reflect our current practices and also ensuring that all of our guidance material, all of our standard operating procedures are up to date. We want to make sure that all of our staff have that information because we do not want to lose we don't want to lose the integrity of our staff if we're not sharing the most current and up-to-date information. And the other piece of that is just making sure that your schedules are all media neutral. So you're going to need to be accessioning those electronic records to the National Archives. And so you need to make sure that your schedule reflects that you should be keeping those in an electronic format. So that has been a big undertaking at NIH. We have worked very closely with our NARA appraisal archivists to get that done. And I'm sure that your appraisal archivists are standing by just waiting to help, making sure that each of your agency's schedules is up to date and media neutral. So we've had great support from NARA on making sure that that was something that we were able to accomplish. So the other thing I do want to talk about as far as updating your policies and making sure that your program is as sound as possible is using the NARA records management self-assessment, perhaps as a tool to identify any weaknesses within your program. So every year after we complete the RMSA, we're given our score, but then also we can see where we didn't score as well as we would have liked. And so for me, that's an indicator of where I need to focus some energy within my agency in developing my records management program. So I would also encourage you to use that tool and look at where your agency isn't scoring as high as you would like and go ahead and start working towards fixing those. And I think that that'll build out a stronger records management program. And overall, it's going to help you meet those M-19-21 due dates and deadlines. All right, next I want to talk about instituting control and oversight practices. So we've done a couple things at NIH that I think would be helpful to share. So the first thing is that we've started conducting program reviews. We intentionally call these program reviews. We do not call them an audit because most people don't like to be audited. So with the program reviews, what we do is we go out to meet with program offices. We talk to them about their record keeping practices. They get to show us about their file rooms and storage rooms that are just full of records, as well as their shared drives or SharePoint sites, wherever they're storing their records. And based on what they provide us and the feedback we receive, we are able to give them additional guidance on how they can be better managing their records. And if there's ever anything glaring that we see, we always elevate that to their leadership. So it's a great way for us to provide on-site records management oversight and provide them with guidance on how to improve their current record keeping practices. And of course, going forward, we always include the M-19-21 deadlines so that that's on their radar and that they're aware of those requirements going forward. The other piece of those program reviews, which we find really helpful, is we're able to see where we're falling short with our policies or our guidance. If our guidance or policies aren't written in a way that can be implemented, we know we have to make those changes. So it's been really productive as far as sharing information and receiving feedback from our customers. So in addition to the program reviews, this year we also did reports for each of the institutes and centers. And in those reports, we not only highlighted M-19-21 and those requirements going forward, but we talked with each IC. We shared information with them on what their records liaisons were doing in order to meet those deadlines. So things like, were they responsive to data calls? Were they responsive to the disposition notices on whether or not their records could be destroyed? Were they attending our records liaison meetings? Or were there other things that they were doing above and beyond? So we just wanted to go ahead and start highlighting the work that the records liaisons throughout our institute are doing and sharing that with the leadership to let them know if we were on target to meet those M-19-21 deliverables. And then also we shared information with them about what to expect in the coming year. So we felt that was a really great way to not only provide oversight to their leadership, but also to remain in communication and promote those M-19-21 strategies that everyone and all leadership positions are going to need to be aware of. Let's see. So the other thing that we know we're going to need to do is also set up controls as far as the use of commercial offsite storage facilities. So it's been very easy using the federal record centers, and there's a lot of controls in place right now. However, I think that moving to commercial storage facilities is going to be a little bit of a wild, wild west situation. So I would encourage you to start planning and thinking now about how you can put those controls in place for your agency to make sure that when records are sent offsite, that you still know when those destruction dates are coming up, you still know where those records are, so that if you receive a FOIA request, you know that you're still responsive for it. And the FRC has made our lives very easy, but going forward, we're going to need to be instituting those controls in place at our own federal agencies to make sure that we are managing those records appropriately. All right. So the next strategy I want to talk about is forging those alliances with other information professionals in your agency. So those individuals that we're targeting at NIH include our IT staff, our FOIA staff, our privacy staff, our OGC, Office of General Counsel, ethics staff, and obviously the business owners. So we realize in order for us to be successful, we need to have those partnerships in place. And a number of the requirements that we're really pushing for with M-19-21 align with objectives that our partners also find very important. So it's great to have other individuals in influential positions that are able to promote and advocate for the deadlines that are included in M-19-21. So if you didn't previously build these alliances during all the work that went into M1218, I would encourage you to do that now. And also think about this going forward. When managing electronic records, you're going to deal with issues that may not have come up in managing paper records. So these alliances are very important if you're considering standing up an information governance program that will help you be more successful in managing electronic records going forward. All right, and another strategy I want to talk about is envisioning a future state for your agency's records management program. So for better or worse, records has traditionally been synonymous with paper records. And going forward, we understand that we're not going to be managing as much paper records as we used to. And our primary focus is going to be on managing electronic records. So it makes sense to start using this as an opportunity to think about how you can build out a program that will serve the needs of your agency. And that may mean that you no longer consider yourself a records management office. So you may want to start considering if you're going to transition to information management or information governance or even knowledge management, or perhaps there's something else that is going to more closely support the needs of your agency. So again, this is a great time. It's an opportunity to start thinking about how you can reshape your records management program to better support your mission going forward and align with the needs of your agency. All right, and lastly, I want to talk about accepting and planning for the active management of electronic records. And this builds on the same concept that while we manage paper records, we will eventually be managing electronic records almost exclusively. So I want to share a little bit of information about me and how I got into this world of information management. So one summer, I was accepted into the internship program at the Smithsonian Museum's National Museum of American History in their Archives Service Center. And so I was able to spend the summer processing the Horace and Fletcher Henderson collection. So this was a collection from two big band musicians that toured the country in the early 1900s, playing in bars and other venues. And they played with some of the greatest musicians, Benny Goodman, Billie Holiday of the time, promoting their jazz music and their original works, as well as performing some non-original compositions. So Fletcher Henderson passed in the 1950s, and he had accumulated scores of records, and the boxes just accumulated in his basement. And then when he passed, Horace Henderson, his brother, went ahead and took those boxes of records and he stored them in his basement. And then after Horace passed, his neighbor went and he got those boxes out of his basement. And the neighbor kept those boxes of scores and records in his basement until he passed. And then eventually his daughter gifted those records over to the Smithsonian Museum to be included in the American History Museum's collection. So what we see here is records that are 50 to 100 years old that are transferred from one basement to another. But they're paper records, and eventually they make it to an archives, and they're able to be preserved. So if we translate that over to the federal space, In the past, we have been able to hold on to paper records in basements and in filing cabinets and storage rooms and not really worry about if those records were going to be in good shape when they got transferred over to the National Archives. But we can't really do that going forward. So we're going to have to start thinking with our electronic records about media obsolescence, format obsolescence. We're going to have to worry about bit rot. We're going to have to think about things like authenticity. How do we make sure that those records are not damaged or altered over time? And that's not necessarily something we had to worry about, those paper records that were stored in filing cabinets and basements. But with electronic records, it's very different. So going forward, we're going to have to be actively involved in the management of electronic records. We can't just forget about them in somebody's basement. So I want to encourage you to start thinking about and planning for those actions now. And again, going back to training and other opportunities to learn about how you can be involved in the active management of electronic records is going to help all of us going forward. So these are my strategies. I hope they've been helpful. I wish you the best of luck on your M-19-21 journey, and I really appreciate your time this morning.
And I do have some questions for you that have come in.
Sure.
Specific to NIH, which was whether the agency takes any special care for PII and health information, which I know the answer broadly across the agency is yes. But how does the concentration and vulnerability of an electronic assets in terms of electronic records archive, how does that factor into your journey to more electronic records management?
Sure. So we do work closely with our privacy office. We're actually located in the same office. So all of our systems go through a very rigorous process just to ensure that privacy impact assessments are in place, that they have those authorities to operate. So all of those checks and balances are in place to ensure that PII, important medical records, that information does not get out to those that shouldn't have it. So again, working with IT staff, privacy staff, just to make sure that we're doing exactly what we need to do is something we take very important. It's something we work on and take very seriously. So yes, we do handle that appropriately.
And another question that came in is, does the holdings report provide a breakdown of the types of records being created in paper and volume?
Yeah, so the holdings report doesn't necessarily include those detailed lines of business. So what I did is at NIH, we have basically 11 categories or buckets of records. And so what I did is I went through and I associated each of those record schedules with that overall bucket. So I have budget and finance, or if this is intramural or extramural related research records, I was able to associate that schedule with that line of business. And so then from that holdings report, I just created a pivot table, and then I could more closely see exactly where those volume of records was most densely concentrated. So that's the kind of information that you can manipulate a little bit and use that holdings report to really get a better handle on what your agency is doing.
Very good. And then there's a question that I think actually came in right as Lisa was wrapping up. So it's more of a broader one, but I just wanted to see if you had any perspective on it. And the question is how helpful is it for agencies to have a chief data officer when it comes to this effort? And I would reframe that slightly to how do the people that are doing focused on data analytics and broader data strategies for the agency, how are they being part of this records management conversation?
Sure. So I think that that's an area that's growing in popularity, and so more federal agencies are kind of paying attention to, is this a role that could help us support our mission? So again, with the strategies I outlined, I think envisioning a future state for your agency's records management program would involve the consideration of, is this an opportunity to more closely align or bring into the conversation a chief data officer? So definitely, as our field continues to evolve, I think that we'll see more interaction with the chief data officer going forward.
Great, thank you. And
thank you.
And then one other question that came in, and I confess that I missed the specific point of context on this one, which was, can we get the list of agencies with the most paper-based processes? And that as an example in early in your remarks, or if that
Sure.
a sort of broader government-wide question.
So the context for which I discussed is just understanding, using that holdings report is understanding which offices within NIH in particular were creating the greatest volume of paper records. And so I use that O1's holding report in order to identify that for my agency. So if that's a question for a particular agency, I would recommend just getting a hold of that report. And then from there, you can kind of determine the institute or center or whatever office within your agency may be the biggest offender in creating paper records. So again, I don't think that that's, maybe there's information government-wide on that, but more specific, you could probably find that information out through your agency.
And this is always the case as we sort of get to the wrap-up, the people say, oh wait, I have one more. Question that just came in is about 508 compliance and whether 508 remediation required for any of these digitization efforts?
That's a great question. I would have to defer to a 508 specialist, but I think with all of the standards that go into making paper records digitized, not only does it include like OCR and DPI requirements, but I'm sure that it does consider 508 compliance as part of that all of our records should be 508 compliant. So I would defer to a specialist on that, but my assumption would be yes.
Very good. And I think we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for giving us the NIH perspective. And I know that presenting to one's webcam is a little bit of a new experience.
Yes.
Good job. I hope you're able to stick around if there are any very specific questions people want to take up with you in the chat room.
Sure, will do.